on the field, there are really no heroes. Jesus is our hero.
Dan, I need some eggs.
Okay.
Can you bring some eggs?
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
While we were in Turkey, the first term, we hit the language hard. We learned the language really well. We got a church started, and then we went home for a year furlough and came back. And our mission leaders, they said, you're no longer needed here in this church. It's up and running fine. You go off and start a new church. So we went off up to the northern side of Ankara, where there was very few Christian workers, there's almost no witness at all up there, and we began to work on planting a church in a place called Keçiören, which means goat ruins. It's a kind of a poor side of town. As we were up there and working with our co-workers, there was one family that we were working with, but our philosophy of ministry was somewhat different, and we ended up having difficulties with that couple, and they complained about us, which resulted in our being asked to leave the field.
In all of the joy of victory, because in the first 4 years we saw a church get started in a Muslim country that had no Protestant churches. And then coming back and being really, it felt humiliating to be asked to leave. And in all of this, having your team members that you felt were wearing the same t-shirts and on the same side, it was very devastating for us. I would say the first time we were asked to leave the field by our team, by our leaders, and it came as such a shock because we didn't know that even there was such a huge problem. And to give you an idea, I had made an apple pie for the leaders that were coming to visit us because I was so happy they were visiting us. And yet their purpose in visiting us was to give Dan a 6-page criticism letter on all the things that were wrong with him. I remember going for a walk after that, and Lord, this is the one thing I didn't anticipate to have happen on the field, that my own team would send me off the field. And I couldn't understand it. It was extremely painful. I felt like such a failure, and was crying every 10 minutes, actually crying every 10 minutes. It was right before Christmas, and we had been told we had to be out of there in 2 weeks. And I didn't understand why it had to happen so quickly. I felt it was all very harsh, and I remember at the time I immediately thought of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the 3rd book of the Chronicles of Narnia, where this Eustace had to get rid of his dragon skin, and Aslan, the picture of God, points his claw and rips the skin off this dragon skin off of him, and he said it was painful. And I then understood this removal of self is only something God can do for you, and it's through the things that you're experiencing. And so even though it's very painful and you feel like a failure, it doesn't matter, because the very essence of you is what God is creating inside of you. And now I can look back 30 years later, 30 years or so on the field, I can look back and I know that God was sovereign in removing us from that place, and God was good. He got us out, and He got us out swiftly, what Dan and I didn't know at the time. And so often we're focused on ourselves. It's not all about ourselves. At that time, my son was being abused, sexually abused by someone in the neighborhood. And neither of us knew it. And God used that team, those leaders, to get us out of that place. And they didn't even know it. So always remember what you're going through. God is sovereign and God is good. And He's doing so many things on so many levels. We can never totally understand it, but we can always totally trust Him.
After being on the field for another about 7 years, again, there were complaints made against us. And for the second time, our mission leadership kicked us off the field. They said, "You're going home and you're not coming back with this mission to Turkey." We knew that God had called us to Turkey. We had that confidence that we had the calling of God on our lives, but we had been burned. We had been through the fire, and there was still smoke pouring off our clothes. And we approached one mission asking us if, before we left Turkey, we approached one mission, "Would you be interested in, interviewing us for a possibility to come with your group?" They said, no way, we're not interested in you. But we decided to trust God that He would have us in a new mission in 3 months, even after all of what we had been through.
The day that they came this time to give us this letter, they told us that they had read the letter to everybody in our team, and they'd given a copy of the letter to all the Turkish pastors that we had worked with, and that now they were reading it to us and telling us basically that they didn't want us on the field. As they left that time, my heart was just so crushed. And but what the Lord did that day, this very day, was He had so many Turks come to our house, and they didn't know about the visit that we had just had, but every single person that came to visit told us how much they loved us and why they were so glad we were in Turkey. It was such a bizarre day. But I remember I was doing the dishes and I looked up to God. I could hear the voices of Dan and the other people in the other room, and we're trying not to tell them what's happening to us. But I cried out to God and I said, "I just want to be alone for a while." And the Lord very clearly spoke to my heart, not in an audible voice, but I knew it was His voice, because it's always, what He has to say is so unusual and so out of where I am at the time. And He said, "Why?" And I said, "Because of the criticism letter. I just want to be alone. I want to cry." And the Lord said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, you saw all those things that they said about us, and those things aren't true." And the Lord said, "Oh, would it be better if they put down your real sin areas?" And at which point I got it. I have no reputation, really, to defend. My Jesus had a reputation, and He became of no reputation for me. Woke up in the morning and went to my devotional that I was using at the time. It was by Amy Carmichael, The Edges of the Night. And I think this is significant, and this is why we want to share this with you. Because there are times in the Christian walk when we are kind of battered about and we don't understand. And God is allowing it. And it's not for discipline, it's not to change us. It's just called the dark night of the soul. And we don't always understand what's happening. But as I said before, God is always sovereign and He is always good. So he was about to teach me something so very, very important in my Christian walk. The verse that he gave me, and I knew it was the verse from him, because he gave me the very feeling. I didn't understand my emotions, but the word in the verse described my emotions. And it was an unusual verse. It was Nehemiah 8:11, not a frequently quoted verse. And the Levites calmed the people, saying, "Do not be grieved. This is the Lord's day." And immediately, when God uses a verse in my heart, he opens it up and he makes it very clear how he's using it in my life. The word I was feeling was grief. And the Hebrew word really for death is separation. And I was feeling grieved because I was being separated from the people I'd worked with for 14 years. I was being separated from the country that I'd served in for 14 years. And it was definitely grief that expressed what I was feeling. And the Levites calmed the people. This came in Nehemiah 8:11 when they were being confronted with their sin. And the Levites calmed the people, saying, "Don't be grieved. This isn't a final separation. This is the Lord's day." And when he says the Lord's day, the day when Jesus defeated our great enemy on the cross and dealt with our sin problem, and no longer are we under this worry and fear of God because of our sin. His blood is enough and it covers us. One of the things Amy Carmichael pointed out was, if God commands us, and this was a command, don't be grieved. Do not be grieved. If God commands us, then we must be able to obey. And so Dan said, yeah, we should obey. And he got his guitar and we began to worship. And as we worshiped, joy was restored, peace came in the worship. Funny thing, it was a Sunday. And we had to go to church with our children who didn't know anything about what we were going through at the time. And we had to go into a room full of people that had heard this criticism letter. And so we walked in there with a peace that passes all understanding. And I sat down and listened to the man preach who probably wrote the letter. And I was able to take notes and to receive from the sermon. And then at the very end, the miracle happened. A man that wasn't with our mission stood up, a Korean man, and he looked at us, directly at Dan and I, and he said, I just want to share a verse at the end of this time before our last song. And he looked at us and he said, and the Levites calmed the people, saying, do not be grieved. This is the Lord's day. In a second, I was up in the heavenlies. I was above the battlefield, and I was looking down, and my heart, all was well. All was well with my soul. Why? Because of what Jesus did on the cross. God is never the accuser. He is never joining with the accuser of the brethren. In every season, in every battle, we're learning. We're always learning. And there's so much more of God that we haven't learned yet. And you don't talk to me about retirement, because this is not something in the Bible. I don't see this word retirement in the Bible. I see Caleb at the age of 80 saying, let me go fight on that hardest mountain where there's giants, because I know I can trust God. And as we get older, we understand more of the heart of God, and we understand more of his greatness, and we're quicker to pray, we're quicker to lean on him. And we're with FAI, which is like just the frosting on the cake for us to be so in alignment with people. We're having a hard time keeping up with how young they are, and they're so full of vision, and we have a hard time doing all the things that they want to do. But we love being free to not be expected to be heroes. That God and Jesus is the only hero, the only one that is preeminent, that deserves all our praise. We have a God that knows how to take good care of us, and he knows that we're small, that we're frail, and he really throws us balls that we can hit with our faith where it is at right now. And You will not be sorry for anything, any time, any money, any energy, anything that you've put in the Lord's hands. You will not regret it.
So no regrets.
No regrets.
That's right.